In early 1959, a group of hikers set out on an expedition across the mountainous region of Western Soviet Union.
A body has been discovered by tourists in Russia's Ural Mountains at the famous Dyatlov Pass, an area with a murky history of unsolved deaths. The pass was the setting for a real-life Soviet mystery. The bodies of 9 hikers were found almost 60 years ago. The cause of their deaths still unknown.
The group consisted of 9 very well experienced hikers and survivalists. They were prepared for the elements. This adventure would prove to be their last. Despite a criminal investigation, photos left behind, and journal entries, the case remains unsolved over a half a century later.
Several very peculiar, bizarre things surround this event. One of which is that when the tent was recovered, they found that a hole had been slashed in the side of it, and all of the team's belongings were left inside pretty much undisturbed, but the team were nowhere to be seen. Then when the bodies were recovered, they were found to be wearing hardly any clothes. They were wearing some sleeping clothes and no shoes, so they must have dashed out of the tent, not even trying to open the door. They slashed the side open in the tent and ran out into the middle of the night, and several of them had blunt trauma, concussions, broken bones, this kind of stuff, suggesting that they'd been attacked.
As we know, they were experienced hikers. They were well prepared for this journey. What could possibly explain this rather bizarre-looking behavior?
This is a case of the Dyatlov Pass incident.
It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better... Sheriff? Gio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
This is Cindy from Virginia, and you're listening to the one and only Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. The Dyatlov Pass incident. You know, I've been looking into this case for, many, many years, and I've come up with multiple theories, and then when I go back and look at what actually happened, none of my theories match up. And it wasn't until recently I was looking into an incident that happened in Sweden that was very similar to what happened to these hikers at the Dyatlov Pass, or Dead Mountain, as it was originally called. And it's such a bizarre case. You know, there's the weird injuries, the missing eyes, missing tongues. A lot of the bodies had internal damage that's hard to explain. And their reaction on why they left the tent. Nothing really seems to add up. Hopefully tonight we'll have some answers. It's such a weird case. Like I said, UFOs, government cover-ups, even the Yeti is all wrapped up into this account. And to find answers is tough at times. I'm joined tonight by Carrie Arnold. And Carrie is the host of Bigfoot Odyssey on YouTube. I'll throw up links. Carrie does The Late Show. He talks to eyewitnesses. He talks to investigators. It's a very cool channel. If you get a chance, check it out on YouTube. I throw it up on the blog at Sasquatch Chronicles a lot. Carrie, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Wes.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming back, Carrie. I always enjoy talking with you. And this Dyatlov Pass incident is such a weird case. I've been looking into it for many, many years. And there's so many different aspects to the story. There's UFOs, there's government cover-up, there's the Yeti, which is really bizarre if you read some of the diaries, what was going on up there. And then, you have these strange deaths to where these people have these weird injuries and they seem to leave their shelter in an orderly fashion in the middle of the night, which is weird. And as you look into it, you can really take this almost in any direction. But when you try and put something to it like a Yeti or UFO or even the government, and then you look at the evidence, nothing really seems to add up. I know you've been investigating it, Carrie. What's your take on what happened there?
Well, just looking at kind of who these people were, these were not average, everyday college kids. These were professionals in the making as far as I was concerned, at least the 9 that made it. But even the other guy, who, by the way, lived to be 75 years old, he died in 2013. So the best decision he ever made was not to go on this trip.
Yeah.
They were headed to a particular mountain pass. I can't remember the name of it, but they ended up off course a little bit because of the weather. They were just a little bit west. And, when they realized this, they set up camp where they were, Kholat Syakhl, which is the dead mountain, is what it means. And the reason they call it that, there are some things that you can watch. They call it the mountain of the dead, but that's not right. That's just them sensationalizing the facts a little bit. It's just called Dead Mountain because there's not a lot of wildlife there. Hunting's bad. The Mansi, it's Mansi territory, the Mansi people, which are kind of native backwoods people. They're not, this is not people you're going to find in town anywhere. So it's their territory. It was theorized that the Mansis had something to do with it, but I really don't think so. If you look at everything that went on, where they were, and exactly what happened, you had Igor Dyatlov, who was a radio engineer, or he was a student to be a radio engineer, and he was the group leader, and ended up being the namesake for. They changed the name to Dyatlov Pass from Kholat Syakhl. Okay, with him, there were 3 Yuris. Yuri is like John, in Russia. It's like John in the United States. You had Yuri Kronovashenko. He was 23. He was a construction and hydraulics student. Yuri Yudin, he was 21, a geology student. And Yuri Doroshenko, he was also 21 and was another radio engineering student. You had Zina Adia Kolmogorova, they called her Zina. She was 22. She was a radio engineering student. Alexander Klevetov, he was 24, a nuclear physics student. Rustam Slobodin, who was 23. He was a graduate. He graduated the year before, mechanical engineer. Lyuda Dubinina was 20. She was the youngest one there, engineering and economics student. Nikolai Thibault Brignol was 23. He graduated the year before also as a civil engineer. And the oldest one, he was a World War II vet. He was 38 years old. Semyon Zolotoryov, he joined the group to complete his level 3 hiker certification. Now, all the members were very adept hikers and skiers, and they were all after their grade 3 hiker certification, which is the highest certification you can get in Russia. And what we know is on January 23rd, they left Yekaterinburg. They traveled north 200 miles to Ivdel. They got there around 11 o'clock at night on the 25th of January. Now, the next morning, they traveled further north to Vichy, where they would begin their journey. The young guy, the leader of the group, Dyatlov, he checks in with the Bureau of Extreme Sports. He's a member of these guys. And he tells them he's going to send a telegram to his father. And when he gets to the end of his journey, he'll send them a telegram to let him know he's finished. On the 27th is when they actually started, and they skied along the Levsa River to an abandoned mine. And this was like the last human outpost in the area. That after that, you weren't going to find anybody anywhere except for the Mansi people. Now, Yuri Yudin wasn't feeling well. He was getting worse, and he decided he was going to turn back. So the smartest thing he ever did. And like I said, he lived to be 75 or 76. He just died about 7 years ago. But they carried on to Mount Otorten is where they were going. And on that route, they cached some supplies of food for the trip back. So they hiked about 2 more miles to the base of Kholat Syakhl, which means Dead Mountain, which is now what they call Dyatlov Pass. And the bad weather had them slightly off course, just a little bit to the west. Well, they pitched camp on the north slope of Dead Mountain for the night. And according to diaries, they were going to catch their bearings in the morning. And sometime during the night, they all rushed out of their tent into minus 11 degrees cold, never to return. And when they didn't receive word of the completion of the expedition on the 12th, nobody was really too concerned. It's an arduous trip, and, hiking times can vary. But when they still hadn't heard from them by the 20th, they had some relatives that were worried, and they demanded that a search party be sent out to find the group. So a bunch of volunteer students mounted up, and by the time they got to the Lvsa River, they were joined by the Russian army, which is kind of strange, I think. While the army would, be a part of that, it's kind of like you hear on the Missing 411, the FBI joining in a missing persons case. It's just not done. But what they found, the whole campsite was completely out of order. Boots and clothes were strewn about. There was this huge gash inside the tent. 9 sets of footprints, some of them were bare, found leading away from the site. And about a mile northeast of the northeast edge, right at the edge of the woods, they found the remains of a small fire and the frozen bodies of Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were shoeless. They were in their underwear. Their hands and feet were black and really burnt badly. There was a tree nearby when they found some broken branches up to at least 15 feet, suggesting that one of them climbed up there to get a good surrounding view. Between there and the camp, they found Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. And their position suggested that they were heading back to the camp and just froze to death. But the curious thing is that they were only about 800 feet apart, but it did appear that they were trying to head back to the camp. But all 5 bodies were examined, and it was concluded that they died of hypothermia, though Slobodin was found to have a minor skull fracture. So they looked for the others for a couple of months and finally found them. They were buried under 13 feet of snow in a ravine about a quarter mile farther into the woods. Now, they were found fully clothed, and there were signs that they had harvested clothes from the others. So 3 of the 4 had suffered severe injuries. Dubaninia and Solotryov were found to have their chests caved in, and Brinyal had major damage to his skull and all had badly fractured bones and were just all busted up like they were in a car accident is what they said. These were the injuries of someone that was in a car accident. Now, Dubaninia was found missing her eyes, her tongue, and part of her lips. They were just completely gone. Now, the authorities wrapped up the investigation pretty quick and determined that an unknown compelling force that the hikers were unable to overcome was the cause of death, and that's quoted. Public access was banned for 3 years to that place as a result of the investigation, and it was all classified until 1974. That's what we know.
Yeah, it's definitely what we know at this point. I think the question becomes what happened to those 9 hikers that night, that fateful night they were up on the mountain. And there's so many bizarre curveballs within this story. And I think, this is 1959, so it's at the height of the Soviet Union's power. And, they went in and covered it up. And I think when they did that, it created this weird legend as far as what happened to these people. And speaking of different aspects of what happened to them, there was weird balls of light flying around the sky that night. The hikers saw it. They wrote about it. People in the area saw these weird objects in the sky. Even one of the hikers appeared to get a picture of something in the sky. It's black and white, but it looks like something flying around the sky. So now we have this UFO aspect. And, in this area of Dead Mountain or Dyatlov Pass, recently there's been accounts of people seeing Sasquatch in this area, or Almas or Yeti, whatever you call it in that area, these weird creatures running around in this area. And they write about it in their diaries. Not only do they write about it, but there's a picture of what appears to be a creature peering around a tree. So now we got Bigfoot, adding to this case. We have radiation. Why is there radiation on the clothes of the people's clothes? It's bizarre. And then the way they died. When you look at the way they died, some of the injuries just don't add up. You have missing eyes, missing tongues. They appeared to like they were in a car accident. What would cause such injuries like this? And then when you look at the way they left the tent, I mean, they took off in the middle of the night and they kept the tent open from the inside out. Why would they do that? That's not something you would think an experienced hiker would do. And these were very experienced hikers. I think they'd put a lot of people to shame today with their skill set. And then they leave in an orderly fashion. They don't rush down the hill. No one seems like they're in a hurry. It's weird, as you look at every aspect of this. I'm kind of curious. What do you think happened up on that mountain?
Well, the way I envision this in my mind, and just the military presence. You were talking about the strange orbs. There were 3 strange orbs, and it was seen by other hikers 30 miles away, and it was over Kholat Syakhl. And meteorological services also confirmed that. A lot of the film evidence disappeared and wasn't entered into record. There were high-ranking military officials that came to watch the autopsies. And you talk about the radiation. 3 of them were found to have radiation on their clothes. Okay, first, who even looks for radiation in a place like this? That's got, to me, that would be my first question. Well, what I think happened is they were in the middle of a place where they were testing some kind of weapon, which I think is what these I think like a 3-stage rocket or something, that something lands pretty close to them and goes off, and it startles them out. And I don't know if they're thinking it's avalanche or whatever, but that's another theory, is avalanche. But there were no signs of avalanche, and they weren't in a place that was really known for having avalanche. If you look at the pictures, it's covered in snow, but you're talking about 8 days worth of snowfall on that one side of the tent. So what I think happened is 3 of them went over to see what it was. They got irradiated, immediately got away from there. 2 of them, they were building a fire. Okay, and I think this is how these guys' hands and feet got burned. I think they were just trying to stay warm, and they burned their hands and feet at the same time. So I think finally they succumb. The 4 decided to go one way to get out of there, put a bunch of clothes on, and the other 3 were going to head back to camp and just never made it. I mean, you're talking about minus 11 degrees, not very many clothes. It was a mile away. So the others make it to the edge of the woods and another quarter mile in. I think they get to this ravine, and they just didn't see it and just fell off. Now, as far as the injuries are concerned, you're talking about 13 feet of snow. So once these bodies, they start to decay, you're losing hydrostatic pressure inside the head. The brain starts to shrink. You're losing that inside the chest cavity, and all that heavy snow just crushes all that stuff in. And the girl, Dubinina, she was found underneath where water was running under it, face down. So I think that might have been what happened, why her tongue and lips and eyes were all gone and not preserved. So that's kind of what I think happened. I think the military came in, and maybe they came in and staged some things. Like I said, there was a lot. If you talk to researchers that were out there with them, and they recall how evidence was ignored and not cataloged, and they were instructed on what statements to give. And this was in the 70s when all this stuff became declassified, when they came out with this. So that's kind of what I think happened. Of course, obviously, there's like 80 theories of what exactly happened.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of theories, and rightly so. There's a lot of weird twists and turns to what happened to these people. And, when I very first started looking into it, I thought for sure what happened was, in the tent, they had that homemade stove oven to keep warm, cook their food, and it was a makeshift homemade deal. And they talk about in their diary of it catching fire and filling the tent full of smoke. And there's pictures of them when they were alive with burnt clothes. And my original theory was, well, that this homemade stove caught fire or caused a lot of smoke within the tent, and they couldn't breathe, they couldn't see, and so they cut open from the inside of the tent to try and get out of the tent. And, they could repair something like that later. But when you really look into that theory, it doesn't really make sense, because when they left in an orderly fashion. I mean, no one was really panicking. They kind of all went single file and left that area. And then why would you leave the tent? If it's just smoke, why would you leave the tent? There was a case in Sweden about 20 years later I was reading about, and it's identical to what happened to the Dyatlov group. In the case in Sweden, there was actually one survivor. They reacted the same way. A lot of them died the same way. And it's a situation where I don't think it was known back in 1959 about this phenomena called katabatic winds. And when you look into katabatic winds, it seems to make sense. A lot of what happened, I think, during the Dyatlov group's incident can be summed up to these katabatic winds. And a katabatic wind, really, it just means descending wind. It's a drainage wind. It's a high density air that sits at high elevation. Generally, it's over an ice pack, over an ice mountain, and it's a high density air that sits up there, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And then because it's on top of a mountain, air pressure builds, and then because of the force of gravity, it collapses and rolls down a mountain. And if you get a chance, YouTube katabatic winds, you can actually, there's a guy in Australia that filmed them, and it looks like clouds just collapsing onto the ocean. It's pretty terrifying. And NASA's actually measured these katabatic winds in Greenland. They can go up to 200 miles an hour. It's been recorded, probably more, but it's been recorded up to 200 mile an hour winds. The average is anywhere between 50 to 100 mile an hour winds that are just upon you. It happens in a blink of an eye, and you're stuck in the middle of basically a hurricane. And so here's kind of what I think happened. I think that they set up for the night on the mountain, and they set up their shelter, and I think they were probably getting ready for bed, probably just ate, and most of them had gone to bed, had gone to sleep. And I think in the middle of the night, this katabatic wind collapsed from on top of the mountain and rolled down the mountain, and within moments, they were in hurricane winds. I think two of the members stepped out of the tent because they were trying to figure out what was going on. Is this an avalanche, which would be the first concern? Or what is this weather system? Is this going to cause an avalanche? So because two of the members were more prepared when they were found dead to be out in the elements, I think they were already outside of the tent. And I think these winds came upon them. You have debris flying around, and they're in terror. They need to get out of this area. There's going to be an avalanche. And I think the tent was starting to collapse on them. And I think they cut the tent open, got out of the tent, and realized they were in big trouble. And there's snow on top of the tent. I think what they did was they took snow, put it on top of the tent to hold the tent down, because they had planned on coming back. And the reason why I think they planned on coming back, on top of the tent was found a flashlight, and it was on. And so I think that was meant to be a beacon on how to get back to the tent. So as they head down this mountain, you have all this debris flying around. They're probably being hit with debris, which would explain some of the injuries as far as it looked like they'd been in a fight. Can you imagine the debris flying around with wind gusts anywhere between 50 and 100 miles an hour hitting you as you're going down the mountain? So I think that they left thinking they were going to come back relatively soon. And when they left in single file. So they're heading down the mountain at this point, and I think what happened was they're getting hit with debris. It's causing injuries. they're in bad shape. They got to get off the slope of the mountain, which is what they do, and they head towards the tree line. And I think the plan was, hey, we'll go make a fire, and you guys go make a shelter. And we'll get a fire going, you guys work on the shelter. And I think a lot of the burn marks on the hands and the feet of the two men that died near the fire, I think that's exactly what happened. I think they put their hands in the fire. You gotta remember, at this temperature, you're gonna put your hand and feet in fire to stay warm. You know, the broken branches 15 feet up, I think they were trying to get firewood to try and stay warm in a very desperate attempt. And it wasn't enough to save these two guys, so I think they died in the elements with hypothermia. And I think the burn marks on the body can be explained. The rest of the group goes down and they try and make a shelter. And the only shelter you can make in this area is like a snow cave. So I think they went down and they were creating this ice cave, this snow cave. And it was underneath the ice shelf. I think it collapsed on them. And that would explain a lot of the injuries, like they had been in a car accident. Can you imagine the weight, 13 feet of snow coming down and crashing on you? It would kill you. Regarding the missing tongue and the missing eyes and the mouth of the poor soul that was there, the female, I think what happened was the shelter collapsed on them, and underneath this ice shelf is running water. Because running water never made sense to me. You know, it's minus whatever degrees up there. It's too cold for running water, but not underneath an ice shelf. And I think she was face down in this water. And as it got warmer, and then it cooled off, and as it got warmer and it cooled off, these bodies are deteriorating. And I think in her situation, the first thing to go is soft tissue, which is your eyeballs, your tongue, your lips. And I think she just deteriorated in the water. I think as members of the group died, they were in a very desperate attempt. I think they were moving the bodies out of respect, and they were taking the clothes off and putting them on themselves in order to stay warm. Very desperate attempt. Some of them died trying to make it back to the tent. Regarding the radiation, Klovatov, who was one of the members of the group, he was actually a nuclear physicist. That was his field of study. And you got to remember, this is 1959 in the Soviet Union. So that's where I think the radiation came from. I think he already had it on his clothes, trace evidence. And as members died and they were exchanging clothes, that would explain radiation being on some of the bodies and some of the other clothes. A lot of people think it was an avalanche. I don't think it was an avalanche. There's no sign of an avalanche in that area. It would have buried the tent, and it would have also buried out their footprints. We wouldn't be able to see their footprints, and their footprints are very clearly seen in all the photos. And so there's no sign of an avalanche, and I don't think an avalanche has ever occurred up on that mountain.
Right. It's just not. If you look at the topography, the elevation is just not there for it. Plus, there's a lot of big boulder outcrops there that would definitely suggest that no avalanche had ever really been there. Those boulders wouldn't still be there.
Right.
What about the skin? Now, they said their skin was found to be a strange tan color, and the bodies looked prematurely aged. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I remember reading that in the report. I don't know what to make of that. You know, all the pictures are in black and white, so it's hard to see for yourself if they had prematurely aged or why there was an orange color. You know, all of them died in extreme temperatures. I don't have an answer for that.
Minus 11, it wouldn't take long for you to freeze solid, like an hour in that cold weather. 11 degrees below zero, minus 22 C.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, a body would freeze in that temperature relatively quickly. Maybe not underneath the ice shelf. I think it was a different temperature underneath there, and I think the bodies deteriorated very differently underneath the ice shelf as opposed to the guys who were trying to start a fire. But I don't have a great answer for that. I know that witnesses at the time did report the bodies were a strange orange color and that they did appear that they had aged very quickly. But it's hard to see that in the photos. You know, the photos are black and white, so it's hard to make that judgment for yourself. I know that there was a gray foam that was reported on some of the bodies it was actually coming out of the mouth. And I don't know if that's water on the lungs. I really don't know. I don't have a great answer for the orange bodies and how they had aged so quickly. I don't have a great answer for you on that.
Well, they did say, and as far as the Mansi people are concerned, that there was the remains of a Mansi tent found really close by, which is just like a Native American teepee, kind of. I think the Mansis are the equivalent of the Native Americans for Russia. Very primitive type of people. You know, they're the ones you see, the Russians you see with the really Asian features, high cheekbones, reddish color skin, almost like Native American, almost like Eskimos, these Mansi people. And that's another one of the theories, is that, you know, the Mansi people, because they were on some kind of sacred property, came and did something and took them out. But to me, the interesting thing is, and I guess it depends on the brain. You get the conspiracy theory brain, and of course it's going to be something malevolent, especially if you go looking at what the people said the years after, how evidence had been ignored and not cataloged, and they were instructed on what to say exactly, which I can imagine, whether anything was nefarious going on or not, the Russian government's going to make you do that anyway.
Yeah, I think the way the Russian government handled it, you know, they're responsible for a portion of creating this legend that's become the Dyatlov Pass. They definitely could have handled it differently. And, you know, regarding the Mansi people, I don't think the Mansi people had anything to do with it. They're relatively known to be pretty cool people, pretty friendly for the most part. And this wasn't a holy mountain that this group was hiking up. And the Mansi people called this mountain Dead Mountain. They wouldn't even hunt up on it because nothing grew up on it. And so it really wasn't this holy land you read about or this holy mountain that they held sacred. It was the complete opposite. They hardly ever went up to the mountain because nothing was up there. It's empty. And if you look at the search groups that were put together at the time to search for these hikers, the Mansi joined in on the search. It would seem weird that the Mansi killed these people and then would join in on the search. And if they did kill these people, why was there no footprints of the Mansi tribe being up there along with the hikers that perished? There's no evidence that they were there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just going through some
no. Yeah, keep going with some of the theories.
Some of the theories going on here, of course, there's the UFO theory that coincides with the three orbs that were seen by others 30 miles away in the direction where they were. And then there's the radiation along with that. To me, the whole Yeti thing, you know, the thing with Zina Kolmogorova, her diary, what she had said in there about the Yeti, and then the picture that was on the camera, I don't know if it was her camera or not, but I do believe it was her diary where she had mentioned, and I don't know, this is not verbatim, but like she couldn't believe the Yeti actually exists. I think that was
I now know the Yeti exists. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it was her camera.
Was it hers?
Yeah, and it's a weird figure that she took.
Long arms. Long arms. And
it wasn't just her diary. I mean, in a lot of the diaries, they're sitting around talking about the Yeti at night. And so it's kind of a weird topic for them to talk about in 1959 up on a mountain. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Another theory was, college kids, they get out there in the middle of nowhere and they've got some magic mushrooms or some other kind of maybe some Mansi potion that they're all getting high and jacked up and they all just went nuts. And that's why the scene is the way it is. Now, they've martyred these people. And if you look at their credentials, it just doesn't seem like these were the type of people that were going to be doing this, especially in, late 50s Russia. These were professionals, and in the communist government, the more credentials you had, the better off you were. And so I don't think that's the case, although it probably would explain a lot of the behavior, that they were just disoriented. But I think infrasound can disorient you, and if the winds were producing that much infrasound, I think they just got disoriented when we're trying to get to the trees because they were out in the open, like you said, and to get out of those winds because the fire was right on the edge of the tree line, and just a quarter mile away was where it was a ravine where it just dropped off, and maybe they did go down there and they were trying to make the camp and it just caved in on them. Like you said, that's heavy stuff, especially ice. It doesn't have to be just snow. I'm sure there was some ice packed up in there too. Because chests were crushed in, one head was crushed completely, bones were broken, they were twisted and mangled pretty badly. A car accident is what they equated it to.
Yeah, and a lot of the injuries, they were actually alive when those injuries took place. So it makes you wonder if they were in that shelter and it came down and crushed them, and they kind of met their demise in there. That's just kind of my theory.
Well, like I said, the only thing that makes any sense, to me, is the inclement weather. So I think something was going on with the military also. I think that's what the 3 orb lights were, whatever was seen there. Maybe it was flares. I don't know. But, I didn't think about the nuclear guy. He was a graduated nuclear physicist. And maybe he was out there on some assignment doing something, for the government. Maybe that's why, the military showed up out there, and that was all part of that. But the whole purpose for the trip was just to, Dyatlov put this thing together, was to get certified level 3 hikers, which apparently means a lot on your resume for a place like that. So I don't know. I'm sure it's the truth. There's probably a mix of some of that stuff in there, but I tend to follow, Occam's razor as much as possible. What makes the most sense. I don't necessarily have that conspiracy theory brain, but it's fun to listen to those guys.
Yeah, I would love to say that it was the Yeti that got them, but Yeti doesn't really make sense. There's no other tracks. It's just the 9 hikers. And if it was a Yeti attack, why are they leaving like they're going back to get the milk from home? There's no rush to get out of there. People don't seem to be terrified when they're leaving. And if it was a UFO, you could make the same argument with the Yeti. Why are they leaving in this orderly fashion out of there? Even though lights had been seen in the sky. And the government was well aware that people had seen these lights. And I kind of think that's why the government was there. I don't know if they were testing a new weapon. It could have been UFOs, something out of this world that was flying around the sky at night. So the Soviets come in, they shut the place down, put it in lockdown, and tell everyone what to say and what not to say. And then they classify everything because they didn't want anyone talking about what they had seen that night. As sad as that sounds.
They shut that place down for 3 years, and it stayed classified until 1974. You're talking about them being unclothed. There's a condition with hypothermia where when you start to lose a lot of your body temperature, you actually feel hot, and people start to shed their clothes. And I don't remember hearing or reading about clothes being found anywhere else but on other people, except for back at the camp. But, that's just another one of those things. They could have had more clothes on and just started shedding them. I think boots are one of the first things to come off as your feet start to feel really hot, even though you're really losing body temperature really fast.
Yeah, the whole situation is tragic. The way I hate to see a group of kids, and they really were kids. They were in their early 20s, but they're a very bright group of people who probably had big futures ahead of them. And they had a lot of courage to take on such a task that they were doing. And it was something that was very important to them. The whole thing's tragic, especially the way they died. It's just tragic.
Yeah. And Yuri Yudin, how do you think he feels? The one guy that turned around, less than halfway through the whole thing, lives to be 75 years old. Those were his friends, friends and colleagues. Imagine how that guy felt. And what was wrong with him? I don't even remember what exactly it was.
He was the older one in the group. He actually had, I want to say arthritis, but it was nerve pain near the disc in his back, and it was due to an injury that he had. What's it called when you have long-term arthritis?
Rheumatoid?
Yeah, I believe it was rheumatoid arthritis. I know it was nerve pain in his back. That's what makes they were going up there to party and drink it up and have a good time, really doesn't make any sense, because Yuri left. He didn't want to hold the group up from accomplishing this goal. It was so important to them. And so this whole notion that they were going up, if they were going to go up there to party, Yuri probably would have gone up with them, the way his back was feeling. With regard to the way he felt, You can watch, he talks about it on YouTube in a video, but I don't speak Russian. I would imagine being in his shoes, I would feel somewhere between relieved I wasn't with them and guilt that all of my friends had just died.
You got that right. But it is a tragic thing. We'll probably never really know what happened. It's kind of interesting to look into if you get a chance. Find whatever videos you can find on it or read about it. Just check it out. Decide for yourself what happened there. I really don't buy into the whole Yeti thing, even though I'm sure that's why I'm here.
You mean as far as them killing these people?
Yeah, as far as Yeti killing them, I mean, you've done this long enough, and I've talked to enough people as well to know that this is just not the nature of these creatures, is to just go and kill a bunch of people. Even it's just not part of any anecdotal evidence that I've heard that this is the nature of the creatures, to just go and start tearing people apart and leaving them behind.
Yeah, I don't think it was a Yeti. I think if it would have been a Yeti, a Sasquatch, an Alma, whatever they call it in that area, I think it would have ripped these people apart. And they weren't really hunters. I don't know if they were armed, but their main goal was to hike up this mountain. And so, and then on top of that, you don't really see any other prints, regarding anyone else being there beyond these 9 hikers. And if it would have been a Yeti attack or a UFO or the government, they don't, from looking at the tracks, they don't appear to try and get out of there very quickly. It's very orderly. They leave in a group. It just doesn't add up as far as some of these other theories. I think as you go down the list of theories, as you were going down the list, you start to find out really quick, well, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't really make sense. That doesn't really make sense. Even the government cover-up I think can be explained. But it's one of those accounts that's chock full of so many conspiracies. I think that's why it's become a legend, And regarding the Mansi people, I don't think the Mansi people are really known to be killers. I think that they were...
yeah, they're pretty passive.
Yeah, generally have a reputation of being good people. And I think if they did go in and kill those people, it's weird because why would you join in on the search if you just got in murdering these people? And on top of that, why isn't the killer's footprints next to the people leaving the camp? Nothing of that adds up. There's nothing regarding the Mansi people that actually makes sense of them being involved in the death of these hikers. And I think it's just tragic. The whole story is tragic. And I don't think we'll ever know what exactly happened to these people. I think the katabatic winds make the most sense regarding what actually took place up there. But we'll never know.
One thing I think is really cool, and I think it's just out of respect that they did this, is they changed the name from Dead Mountain to Dyatlov Pass. And I think they did that so people didn't associate Dead Mountain with these 9 dead people. They didn't want people to think that's why they called it Dead Mountain. The actual reason they called it Dead Mountain is because nothing never lived up there, even wildlife. It was just barren area. So I think that was one cool thing about what they did as a sign of respect. I think it was to change the name of the place. So
yeah, it is a sign of respect, and I'd rather call it Dyatlov Pass than Dead Mountain. It's so tragic. It's a sad story. A bunch of really bright young people met their demise on the side of this mountain, and I don't know that we'll ever really have answers as far as what happened. Like I said, I have my own theories. Everyone has their own theory as far as what happened to those people, but it's tragic. It's tragic for the families. It's tragic for the survivor. It's a terrible story. It's a very sad story. And, but as far as you coming on, Carrie, I really appreciate you coming on talking about this because I've been wanting to do this show for years. And I know a lot of people have done this show regarding the Dyatlov Pass, and there's so many weird twists and turns to the story, it's hard to find the truth. But I really appreciate you being here. Gary Arnold with Bigfoot Odyssey on YouTube. Definitely check it out. I'll throw a link. Gary does a researcher's report. He talks to eyewitnesses, and he also does Shudder. where eyewitnesses send him his story and he kind of retells it for people who don't want to come forward. It's very cool stuff. But Carrie, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk about